Stacy slipped past the grocery store checkout, almost on tiptoe, her worn-out sneakers barely brushing the linoleum floor. Clutched tightly against her chest was a warm, fragrant loaf of bread. Right now, it felt like the most precious thing in the world, mostly because she didn't have a single penny to pay for it. Suddenly, a sharp screech shattered the quiet hum of the store behind her. "Rick, stop her! Catch that thief!" The girl's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The glass exit doors were just a few steps away when she caught a massive shadow moving in from her peripheral vision. Stacy ducked and lunged forward. The security guard's hands swiped through empty air, brushing against her just enough for her to catch the heavy smell of an unwashed uniform. He was breathing heavily, wheezing like an angry bull. Bursting out onto the street, she ran with everything she had. After sprinting a few blocks without looking back, Stacy ducked sharply into the first alleyway she saw. Her lungs were on fire. A sharp stitch stabbed at her side. She slipped into a narrow gap between two buildings, desperately looking for a hiding spot, but instantly froze. It was a dead end. 3 solid brick walls and nowhere to run. Standing near an unmarked metal door under a concrete awning was a man in a dark, slightly rumpled suit jacket, quietly smoking a cigarette. Stacy spun around to escape, but her retreat was already cut off. The security guard from the supermarket came barreling into the alley. His face was beet red, sweat pouring down his temples, and his angry glare promised pure trouble. Before she could pull away, his heavy hand clamped down firmly on her collar. "Thought you could outrun me?" he wheezed triumphantly, giving her a shake that made her teeth chatter. "I'm going to teach you a lesson you won't forget. No one steals on my watch." Stacy squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for a blow, and only held on to the poor loaf of bread tighter. Right then, a calm, steady voice echoed from the man in the jacket. "How much do you want for the bread?" The guard froze, taking a second to realize someone was speaking to him. Stacy felt his grip loosen just a fraction. "What's it to you, pal? None of your business." "Name your price," the stranger repeated. Stacy glanced timidly at the guard. He sized up the stranger with a calculating look and let out a nasty smirk. $500. He paused to let the ridiculous demand sink in, then added, "Cash." Stacy turned her eyes to the stranger. Without a word, the man calmly pulled a wallet from his inside pocket, counted out the bills, and handed them over. The guard snatched the money, straightened his posture, and shoved Stacy toward the man. "Here, have your fun. And as for you, kid, I know your face now. Don't you ever step foot in my store again." As the guard vanished back down the alley, Stacy turned to face her savior. She was terrified. She couldn't wrap her head around why a complete stranger would just hand over that kind of money for her. The man looked to be in his early 50s. A web of fine lines crinkled around his eyes, and thick silver hair lined his temples, giving him a tired but distinguished look. He was neat, and a faint, subtle trace of expensive cologne lingered in the air around him. The scent of a completely different world, one Stacy had never known. "Thank you, mister," she finally managed to whisper. The man blew out a stream of smoke and looked down at her. His gaze was heavy, entirely free of pity or sentimentality. "You can't spread thank you on bread, kiddo," he said flatly. "I just handed that brute $500. That's pretty much my cafe's entire breakfast rush from yesterday. And I'd really like to get that money back somehow." A cold chill ran down Stacy's spine. She had run into these generous types before on the streets and around train stations. Everyone knew what kind of price tag usually came with sudden kindness. She instinctively took a step back. I don't have any money, she stammered, her knees beginning to shake. I can't pay you back. Please, don't hurt me. The man must have seen the pure terror in the teenager's eyes. He frowned and shook his head slightly. Calm down. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, he cut in, nodding toward the metal door under the awning. I own a pizzeria right here. My dishwasher just gave notice today, saying it's her last shift. If I don't find a replacement by tomorrow, I'll be the one stuck at the sink, and the whole place will grind to a halt. He looked at her intently. I'm offering you a job. Until I find someone permanent, you can work off your debt. Stacy hesitated for a split second. A job. A real job in the warmth, where it smelled like delicious food instead of the damp street. It felt too good to be true. She cast a quick glance back down the dark alley and then looked at the man again. Mister, would it be okay if… She trailed off, biting her lip. Could I stay in the cafe overnight? I don't have anywhere to go. I've been sleeping on the streets. The man's brows furrowed, and Stacy panicked, fearing he would say no and this tiny lifeline would vanish into thin air. But he gave a firm nod. There's some space in the back room. Come on then, kiddo. Let's show you the ropes. The owner pushed open the heavy metal door, and Stacy stepped into a dark, narrow hallway. The rich aroma of fresh baking and melted cheese instantly hit her. After the crisp outside air, the atmosphere inside felt thick and welcoming. As they walked further in, the lights grew brighter, and the bustling sounds of a busy kitchen became clearer. On their way, they crossed paths with a young woman with perfectly styled hair, wearing a crisp blouse and a professional skirt. A shiny name tag on her chest read, Vicky, manager. Sam, Tony's getting worried about the dishwasher, she reminded him, her eyes lingering for a fraction of a second on Stacy's ragged clothes. Did you find someone? Yes, Vicky. This young lady will be taking over the dish station, the man replied, leading the way into the kitchen. There, standing by a large conveyor pizza oven, was a sturdy, dark-haired, middle-aged man in a white chef's coat. He deftly picked up a pizza with a paddle and slid it smoothly into the oven. Seeing the owner, he set the paddle aside. Sam, tell me you found a dishwasher for tomorrow. Mrs. Sanders is finishing up her last day today. She gave us fair warning. Don't panic, Tony. Here's your new dishwasher. Sam nudged Stacy forward. The chef gave the girl's slender frame a calculating look. His eyes were sharp and businesslike. What's your name? Stacy, she whispered, barely audible. Stanislava, Sam corrected gently. Tony, put her with Mrs. Sanders for now. Let her show her how everything works. He turned to the manager standing in the doorway. I have to head out. Vicky, show the new girl where to change. See if we have any spare uniforms left. Get her up to speed. If anything comes up, give me a call. The owner took a quick look around the kitchen and headed out. The moment Sam was out the door, Vicky's welcoming smile vanished. She looked Stacy up and down with sheer disgust and jerked her chin toward a narrow corridor. Follow me, she snapped, rolling her eyes. As she handed over the uniform and watched her change, Vicky started digging. Where did you even come from? Who sent you? Nowhere, really, Stacy answered honestly, tying her apron. We just met on the street a few minutes ago. Vicky narrowed her eyes, her lips curling into a skeptical smirk. Oh, I see. She gave a resentful huff. Fine. Keep your secrets. You can find your own way back to the kitchen. The shift dragged on. Stacy's feet ached from the unaccustomed standing. Positioned at the sink next to a sullen Mrs. Sanders, she scrubbed dirty plates and pizza boards. Mrs. Sanders worked quickly and silently, only occasionally glancing at the clock. When it grew completely dark outside, she took off her apron and gave a dry goodbye to the staff. Right before leaving, She posed next to her young replacement. "Listen up, kiddo," Mrs. Sanders said in a low voice, nodding toward the chef. "Take my advice. Stay away from those two. They're up to no good." With that, the woman walked out, leaving Stacy completely bewildered. Tony was methodically chopping vegetables, keeping his head down. Vicky walked in and approached him. They stood by the assembly table, their shoulders almost touching, whispering to each other while casting frequent glances toward the dining room. Strange, sly grins played on their faces. Feeling the new girl's eyes on them, Vicky snapped around. Her face instantly hardened. "What are you staring at?" she hissed. "Don't you have work to do? Get back to scrubbing those dishes. We didn't hire you to stand around." Stacy quickly turned back to the sink, scrubbing the plates with renewed vigor. By the end of the shift, she finished the last of the dishes and walked out into the dining room. The customers were all gone. The servers, Vicky, and the chef were huddled by the counter. Stacy sat in the shadows at one of the tables to catch her breath, and fragments of their quiet conversation drifted her way. $50 each for the servers tonight," Vicky said in a businesslike tone, quickly handing something out to the staff. "And $100 for Tony for the extra pizzas." The rest she confidently folded and tucked away into her purse. "All right, let's wrap it up and head home. $50 each." Stacy's breath caught in surprise. She had no idea someone could make that kind of money in a single evening. Her daydreaming was cut short by the manager's voice. "What are you doing, dozing off? You still have to mop the dining room floor. I'll be checking it first thing in the morning. If it's not spotless, I'm docking your pay." Stacy ducked her head, quickly grabbing the mop handed to her. Her fearful reaction brought a cruel laugh from the manager. Tony walked over and casually put his arm around Vicky's waist. "Come on, Vic. Leave the little stray alone," the chef said lazily. They walked out together, still laughing, locking the door behind them. Left alone in the empty restaurant, Stacy wondered, does everyone in the world make money like this every single day? Early the next morning, the dull thud of the front door and steady footsteps echoed through the empty dining room, waking her up. Stacy quickly washed her face in the restroom and timidly stepped out. Sam was standing by the POS terminal, frowning as he scrolled through a glowing screen. He scratched the back of his head in confusion. "Yesterday was a real bust," he muttered softly to himself. "Only 2,000 in sales. That's strange. The place seemed packed." Catching sight of the girl frozen in the doorway, his expression softened slightly. He walked over to the espresso machine, poured 2 cups, and handed one to Stacy as he sat down at a table. "How did you sleep in your new quarters?" he asked. "And how does a young girl like you end up alone on the streets anyway?" Stacy, warming her hands against the hot ceramic, told him the whole story just as it was. Honestly, there wasn't much to tell. It was a bitter, all too common tale. Her mother had passed away long ago. Her father drank heavily, becoming completely unmanageable in his drunken stupors. There was no one to look after her, and going home was flat out terrifying. Listening to her, Sam could only sigh heavily. "You have a wonderful cafe," the girl added sincerely, looking out the window at the morning sun. "I'd love to work like this too, making maybe $100 a day like your chef, or at least 50 like the servers." Sam choked on his coffee, his eyebrows shooting up in astonishment. "Where on earth did you get those numbers, Stanislava? I assure you, a server's daily take is much more modest than that. And the chef doesn't make that either." "But they were dividing up the cash right here last night," Stacy replied innocently. Vicky was handing it out to everyone after closing. The man's face dropped. Maybe they were splitting tips, but those amounts? No, that's impossible. Stacy shrugged in confusion and nodded toward the ceiling. Well, you have cameras in every corner. See for yourself who took what. Sam let out a bitter laugh and shook his head in defeat. Those are just dummies, Stanislava. And everyone on the staff knows it. I cut corners on security when I first opened, and now I'm paying the price. He fell silent for a moment. To open this place, I borrowed money from an old friend, he said quietly, on the condition that I'd pay him back at the end of the year. The final month is up, and I have nothing to give him. Taxes are suffocating. Rent keeps going up. I've been in the red for 3 months straight. If I don't pay back the loan, I lose everything. He looked at Stacy intently. Listen, help me out. See if you can figure out how they're pulling a fast one. If you find the leak, I'll wipe out your entire debt. Stacy was surprised. Why can't you just look yourself? The owner shook his head despondently. I don't see anything suspicious in the ordering system. Tables are opened and closed, cancellations are rare, and Vicky always has a perfectly logical explanation for them. It's airtight. But I can feel it in my gut. Something is off. The numbers just don't match reality. Let me show you how the system works, he said, calling her over to the terminal. Look, first the server opens an order, then prints a guest check. The kitchen sees the ticket and starts cooking. When the guest pays, the server is supposed to close out the table with a final fiscal receipt. Boom. The order is finalized, and the money goes into the register. Got it? As the staff trickled in for the start of the shift, Sam stepped out into the middle of the dining room. Team, gather round for a minute. He scanned the staff, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. I'm going to be straight with you. We're on the brink. If we close this month in the red, the cafe will be seized for debt. I am asking you all to work as honestly and carefully as possible. Every single dollar counts right now. Stacy, standing slightly off to the side, saw what the owner missed. Tony gave Vicky a subtle wink, and she exchanged a knowing glance with the servers, hiding a dismissive smirk behind her practiced smile. Taking their silence as genuine support, the owner offered a weak smile. Thank you for understanding. Vicky, I'll be out for the day. He turned and walked out. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, the tension evaporated instantly. Tony let out a cheerful whistle and pulled Vicky close. She adjusted his chef's coat. Did you hear that? Every dollar counts. She smiled radiantly. We stick to the usual game plan. It's going to be busy today. Let's not waste any time. Tony gave a short chuckle, gestured for the dishwasher to follow, and headed into the kitchen. A few working days flew by. Stacy kept scrubbing plates and mopping floors. She was settling in, starting to spot the patterns and catch the subtle nuances of how the pizzeria ran. Pizzas were carried out to the dining room on wide wooden boards, which eventually made their way back to her sink. Sometimes, the servers would rush in and whisper to the chef, "Make this fast." Other times, Tony would start a pizza just by glancing at the terminal. Stacy kept a sneaky eye on the screen too, noticing a recurring oddity. The exact same open order would sit on the screen for hours, even though the customers had left. The tables were empty, and the wooden boards were already sitting in her dishwater. One day, when Tony stepped out of the kitchen for a moment and a server brought in another board, Stacy wiped her wet hands on her apron and asked quietly, "How come no one paid for that pizza? It's still showing up as open in the system." The server, a young guy, froze, looking at her as if he'd never noticed her before. "What do you mean, no one paid? Where'd you get that idea?" Without another word, he shrugged nervously and hurried back out to the dining room. Tony walked back in and started on the next order, followed closely by Vicky. "Tony, your dishwasher is dragging her feet," she said, pointing at the clean stack. "Look at this. These plates are filthy." She stepped closer. "Maybe she's stealing the cleaning supplies." The chef straightened up and glared at Stacy. "Sam is a good man, but he's foolish to think you can turn every street stray into a decent person." Vicky walked in a circle around Stacy, eyeing her with pure disdain. "Some people are just born lazy and stupid, and there's no fixing it." Stacy felt a hot wave of anger boil up inside her. "Why are you always picking on me?" she snapped, unable to hold back. "I'm working hard and doing my job, and all you do is hiss at me." Vicky instantly recoiled, gasping and clapping a hand over her mouth in mock horror. "Tony," she cried, "did you hear that? She just raised her voice at me. Do something." The chef deliberately wiped his hands on his apron and pulled out his phone. "Hey Sam, it's Tony. Look, sorry to bother you, but your little protege just snapped. She's yelling at Vicky and refusing to work. Claims there are too many dishes. We're back here trying to turn tables as fast as possible, just like you asked. And she's just a bottleneck. You need to find someone who actually wants to work, or I'm done trying to keep order in this kitchen." That evening, Sam arrived to close out the register. The total was disheartening once again. Vicky merely shrugged, putting on a show of false concern. "Just a bad day, Sam," she sighed. "Must be the weather. People are staying in." As the staff was leaving, Stacy stepped out of the kitchen, her hands red and raw from the hot water. "And on top of everything, she's causing drama," Vicky added, pointing a manicured finger at the dishwasher. "Sam, it's impossible to work under these conditions." The owner cast a gloomy look at Stacy. "Come on, Stanislava, don't let me down here. Friction in the team is the absolute last thing we need right now." Vicky walked out behind the others, shooting Stacy a triumphant look. The man and the girl were left alone in the quiet restaurant. Stacy picked up the mop and silently started on the floor. Just then, his cell phone rang. Sam jolted, looked at the screen, and went visibly pale. "Hey, Trevor. Yeah, I know the deadline. No, I haven't forgotten. Things are tight, but I'm managing." "Right, got it. See you tomorrow." He hung up and collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Stacy had never seen a grown man look so utterly broken. "Time's up," he muttered hollowly. "Trevor is coming tomorrow. Remember that friend I told you about who loaned me the money to open? That's him. The year is up, and if I can't pay him back, it's goodbye cafe." Sam slammed his fist on the table in frustration. "Where did I go wrong?" he groaned. "I wrote the business plan myself, calculated every single item. On paper, it all worked out perfectly. And now, 3 months in the deep red. It's like pouring money into a black hole." He lifted his bloodshot eyes to Stacy, a tiny flicker of hope remaining. "Stacy, did you find anything out? Tell me I'm not crazy." The girl walked over and laid a grease-stained piece of paper on the table. "I found something, Sam. Look at this." She pointed to even rows of tally marks. "Take today, for example. I washed 23 wooden boards from the 4-cheese pizza. That's how many times Tony made it, and the servers took it out." The boss frowned, not quite following. "So what? That's our best-selling item." "The catch is, according to your computer, that pizza was only sold 4 times today," Stacy cut in. "I sneaked a look. A server brings out the pizza, the guest eats it. When it's time to pay, the server asks for cash, never rings up the final receipt, and just moves that open order in the system to another empty table. Vicky pockets the cash and splits it with the crew. Meanwhile, the pizza stays open in the computer until the next guest orders it, and they just keep the wheel turning. The pizzas get baked, the dishes get washed, but the register stays empty." Sam listened, his eyes widening bigger and bigger. He walked over to the terminal, looking back and forth between her tally sheet and the screen, still struggling to believe his own eyes. The next day, the cafe was bustling as usual. Vicky greeted guests with her professional smile and showed them to their tables. The servers zipped around delivering orders, and delicious smells wafted from the kitchen. Tony was deftly managing the oven. Stanislava was at the sink, scrubbing another wooden board when Sam appeared in the doorway. "Come with me," he called out shortly. He asked her to take off her apron and led her into the dining room. As they walked, Stacy noticed how hollow and exhausted he looked after a sleepless night. Approaching a far corner table, Sam explained quietly, "Trevor will be here any minute. I need you in this meeting. Tell him exactly what you told me." Stacy swallowed hard, feeling her fingers go cold. Passing the host stand, she caught Vicky's eye. The manager sneered with blatant contempt at the pale, disheveled girl, likely assuming the dishwasher was about to get fired and paid out. A few minutes later, a distinguished, older gentleman walked into the dining room. Sam nodded toward him. "There he is. Well, it's time to face the music." At the sight of the wealthy guest, Vicky instantly beamed with a wide smile. "Uncle Trevor, hi! We don't see you around here very often." "Well, Vicky, you know pizza isn't really my thing," he offered a brief smile. "Where's Sam? We have a meeting, and actually, I'd like you to join us. I want to hear how my investment is doing." Vicky happily led her uncle to the table. Sam stood up. The two men exchanged a firm, respectful handshake and sat down. Stacy sat on the edge of her seat, barely daring to breathe. "So Sam, how are things looking with the pizzeria?" Trevor started, without beating around the bush. "From what I can see, not great. A year has gone by, and I haven't seen a dime of the promised dividends. Plus, the loan repayment is due today." "I'm in the red, Trevor," Sam said quietly. "Deep in the red for 3 months now. I can't pay you back today." Trevor's expression darkened. "I'm sorry to hear that, but a deal is a deal." "I know," Sam nodded. "All I have left is this pizzeria." "Then I'm going to have to take the business to settle the debt," Trevor said, turning to his niece. "Well, at least I can hand it over to Vicky. She's got the experience, and now she'll have her own place." Vicky practically jumped out of her skin with joy, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Uncle, what an amazing gift! Let me go grab Tony right now. He needs to hear this." As she skipped off toward the kitchen in excitement, Sam looked his friend straight in the eye. "I let you down, Trevor. But there's something you need to know before you take over the keys." "Go ahead," Trevor allowed. "Stanislava," Sam nodded toward the girl. "Show him the inventory logs and our math from this past month." He laid a few papers in front of his friend. "Look at my business plan, Trevor. It lists the average cost breakdown for a single pizza. Tell me, based on this amount of flour and cheese purchased, how many pizzas should we have made?" Trevor pulled out his phone, squinted at the numbers, and did some quick math. "Let's see. Based on our average portions, you bought enough ingredients for at least 900 medium pizzas." Sam stood up and invited his friend over to the POS terminal. Stacy followed closely behind. "Now look at this. According to the registry, only 684 were actually rung up this month." Trevor frowned in confusion, looking back and forth from the monitor to his friend. "I don't get the discrepancy. Waste? Spoilage?" That's when Stacy swallowed her fear and spoke up. "No, Trevor. They're just running the exact same pizza in the system on a loop. A guest eats, pays in cash, and Vicky never closes the ticket. She just moves it to another table. And they do it all day long. The pizzas are baked, the inventory is used, but the cash register stays empty. Trevor stared at her. Sam added firmly, "This is Stanislava, our dishwasher. She uncovered the scheme Vicky and Tony used to rob me blind, and you, by extension." Trevor opened his mouth, completely stunned, just as a glowing Vicky and a triumphant Tony emerged from the kitchen. "Tony, can you believe it? This whole place is going to be ours soon," Vicky chirped. Trevor turned to them slowly. "Have you two been skimming off Sam?" "What are you talking about, Trevor?" Tony tensed up instantly. "Who fed you that garbage?" Trevor silently pointed at Stacy. Vicky flared up immediately, her face contorting with rage. "You're listening to this pathetic kitchen scrub? She'll spin any lie you want to hear. She's just bitter because I made her lazy butt actually work." Stacy silently stepped up to the terminal and pulled up yesterday's system log. She brought up a long string of open order transfers for that single 4-cheese pizza, moving from table to table over the span of several hours. Each of those actions required a manager's card and administrative clearance. "This proves it," Stacy said, pointing at the screen. Only Vicky could authorize dozens of table transfers in a single shift. And meanwhile, Tony was baking pizzas without any official tickets from the system. Trevor stared grimly at the screen, then slowly raised his eyes to his niece. His face turned crimson. The rage burning in his eyes was so intense that Vicky instinctively took a step back. "You two have absolutely no shame." His voice boomed like a thunderclap, causing the servers to freeze in their tracks. "I put you in here to be this man's right hand, and instead, you rob him blind and show zero respect for your own uncle. Those are my funds tied up in this place. I was counting on those returns." "Uncle Trevor," Vicky stammered, but a heavy fist slamming onto the table cut her off. "Get them out of here, Sam." Trevor turned to the owner, his voice cold. "Both of them." He shot his niece one last icy glare. "You won't get another cent from me as long as you live. And don't ever show your faces at my house again. As for that Caribbean honeymoon you begged me to pay for as a wedding gift, forget it. You're both disgraceful. Close out your open tables, pack your things, and get out," Sam told the stunned manager and chef. With the kitchen suddenly missing its chef, the pizzeria had to close its doors temporarily. Trevor sat at a table, looking at his old friend from under his brow. "I'm so sorry, Sam. I never imagined things would turn out this ugly. Turns out I'm partly to blame for your troubles too." He paused. "What do you think? Can you bounce back?" Sam nodded. "If you give me a little time." Trevor smiled. "I'll give you a year to pay back the loan, but with interest, just like we agreed." "That's more than enough, my friend." Sam let out a massive sigh of relief. Stacy felt a weight lift from her own chest as well. It felt as though she had been the one on the verge of losing everything just moments ago. "It's a deal then," Trevor said, giving Sam a friendly slap on the back. "And keep an eye on that girl. She's sharp. Don't let her go." Sam and Trevor weren't about to let Vicky and Tony off the hook for their betrayal. They filed a civil lawsuit to recover the damages. According to the system logs, the losses over the past 6 months totaled nearly $50,000. The fraudsters had to scramble to find the funds to pay back what they stole. The scandal permanently closed the doors of every respectable establishment in town to them. Every server and cook who had a hand in the scheme was fired right along with them. This whole ordeal forced Sam to completely reinvent his approach to the business. Together with Stanislava, they built a rigorous hiring process, complete with thorough reference checks and paid working trials under a mentor's eye, where a candidate's integrity was evaluated just as much as their skills. Slowly but surely, the cafe gathered a tight-knit, honest, and dedicated team that truly valued their jobs. At Stacy's suggestion, the dummy cameras were replaced with a fully functional security system. The owner no longer had to worry about mysterious shortfalls. The numbers in the reports now lined up perfectly with reality. Stanislava spent a few months working as a server before stepping into the role of manager. She graduated from renting a small room to moving into a cozy apartment of her own, finally leaving behind her fear of tomorrow. A bright afternoon sun flooded the dining room with warm, gentle light. Trevor was sitting at his usual table, thoroughly pleased with his latest dividend check. Sam sat across from him, squinting against the sunbeams. "Well, Sam, my wallet is practically singing this month," Trevor smiled. "You can thank Stanislava and our new team for that," the owner replied proudly, pulling out a chair for his assistant. Stacy placed 2 cups of freshly brewed coffee in front of the men and pulled up a chair next to them. "So Sam, what do you say now? Can you spread thank you on bread?" He looked at her and burst out laughing. Those $500 spent on a frightened street girl holding a loaf of bread had truly paid off 100 times over. "Wait, what's this story about a loaf of bread?" Trevor asked, leaning forward with curiosity. He could only blink in confusion as the two of them laughed even harder in response.